The presentation, so thanks for the opportunity to attend the program and also to present. It's been an interesting experience so far. And I want to basically kind of put on, not on paper, but on slides, some of the discussions, quite informal discussions that we had with other participants this week. And it's really talking a little bit about what I do, but mainly about some ideas that I have little to very little detailed plans on how to do, and it's just kind of to start discussions and get your feedback, you like brainstorm some ideas of some things we could do in the related to the program. So I called it data and conceptual challenges in indicator development, but there's basically two things. The first one is looking at issues of scale, so somehow related to what Laura presented yesterday, which is how to basically get some data from at a particular scale, but from limited information or information that is at coarser scale. And then if I have enough time, I will go to the second point, which is some questions about how you design indicators, how you merge different indicators. Like we talked a lot about different goals we want to achieve and some trade-offs that might exist, or synergies that might exist between two goals. So for example, nutrition, quality of food, and environmental sustainability of the food production, or cost of food, and etc. So also related to some of the economics concept that Brett presented yesterday. So a bit of background just to explain why we're interested in this topic, which is kind of obvious, but you know, we need to produce more food, or at least we need to feed more people in the next couple of decades. And food production itself, so agricultural land use, is one of the most extensive and most threatening land use types to biodiversity and other environmental goods and services, because it uses most of the water. So most of the water consumption is for agriculture, large land use, and inputs from fertilizer, pesticide, and other things. So there are many processes that are important in small scale when we're talking about agriculture. So this is an example just looking at the hydrological cycle, but also the meteorology, and maybe with climate change, how that is going to change in the future. Biogeochemical cycles basically are very important at small scale, so we need a high spatial resolution to really understand what's happening. And at the same time, we want to have a global coverage because there are a lot of interlinkages and teleconnections occurring at the global scale. And if we want to make this situation better, so if we want to improve sustainability, we need to maybe look at diets, trade, as Peter mentioned also, different policies, and then link and then the different values that this all affects, so biodiversity, climate change, etc. All that can occur at the global level. So we need global coverage and high spatial resolution. So that's kind of the introduction, let's say, the motivation. And so this is some examples of the kind of data or the kind of results that my team has been developing. So this is, for example, of one crop, which is wheat. And it shows different stressors of, on the environment that agriculture applies. So the first one is land use, so how much hectares per calorie of wheat produced is used. So you see some differences across countries and within countries as well. We have also application of phosphorus, which can then lead to water quality deterioration, emission of GHGs, leading to climate change. Groundwater use, which can lead to depletion, and it's quite a famous issue, for example, in North India and Pakistan. So this is just some outputs to show you what we are going to do with the data that I'm then going to describe and have this problem on. So we've done it for livestock product as well, and then we can do global averages, for example, and compare different products, and we see already like that it changes depending on your goal. If your goal is surface water, you might want to favor the, oil pan, but definitely not if your goal is GHG emissions. Or if your goal is to reduce emission, you should reduce the rice, but maybe not so much if it's about land use. So there are some differences. And then we also look at trade-off this way. I'm not going too much into detail into this figure, but if you're interested in this work, I'm happy to talk about it later today or early next week when I'll be here. Yeah, that's one last example of something we've looked at. So this is comparing the surface water intensity of to produce bovine milk in Germany without trade, so assuming all the feed that the cattle is consuming is local, and with trade, so with the data that we have from FAO stat type of sources, we know that they import those crops from other countries that have a different use of water. So in this case, we see that with trade, which is the current situation, they use more water per unit of milk produced than if they did everything domestic. But they don't do it for other reasons. Anyway.
Sorry,
yeah.
There's no grass in there.
There is grass, but the grass is not traded, so it doesn't make a difference.
But if they were not trading, they'd intensify their pasture production, or it would impact their grass.
Sorry?
If they didn't trade, so I guess the right-hand one is sort of representation today.
Yes.
And the left-hand one is
it's like a hypothetical scenario.
Your
using the footprint from Germany instead of the trade partners.
But if not only would the soya and barley and stuff that they're now eating be different, but they would actually use their grass differently as well, right?
Yeah. So that's assuming diet is fixed.
Yeah.
Diet of the animal. But for your question, actually, this is surface water, so we don't irrigate grassland in this model.
Because this irrigation,
this is surface water, so
just general use of rainwater.
We split between the water sources. So we have the rainwater, what you call rainwater, which is like the soil moisture in rain-fed agriculture, and then surface water and then groundwater.
Okay. So
that was really just anyway. Go for it.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have shown that slide.
You know what I'm gonna say, right?
No, I don't.
So I haven't got a problem with the idea of Germany, German Brexit, no more imports and exports to Germany, fine, okay.
I mean, it's not a CGE experiment.
Sure, but you could, if that was the scenario, then soya production might be very inefficient in Germany, so they don't produce very much of it, so that they produce much more wheat and barley. So you would expect even if pasture's constant, you'd expect the mix of feeds used for animals would change. It wouldn't be the same mix of feeds used for your livestock. There would be a shift in the use of livestock, the types of feed.
Possibly.
For sure, right?
Because that's based on what livestock in Germany is currently consuming.
Yeah, given its current trading relationships. But if
and that's why it's not efficient in soy, so it's importing it from other places that are.
But
So
can you actually grow soy at all in Germany?
Yeah, if it's there, it means that they do grow some.
Yeah, but it's probably a time. I mean, I'm surprised they grow it.
They grow some. Yeah.
But to scale up that it's.
No, I agree. So that's like not a final graph. So the point to show you like all of these kind of results is that it all relies on a lot of things, but the main underlying input is this global map of crop yield and harvested area. So this is coming from this is actually 2008, 2018. I wish there wasn't 2018. So yeah, that's kind of the whole problem, is that we have those data sets so the publication is 2008, but the data itself refers to around year 2000. And this is the only publicly available dataset of this kind.
I can probably get you some other data sets.
Like spam.
So modeled data that takes.
Yeah, so model.
That takes.
Yeah.
Well, this is a model. I'm afraid it's a model.
No, not really. I will explain how it's produced.
Yes, from Earth observation and FAO, isn't that combination? Anyway.
Yeah, and census data, you can't really say census
Yeah.
data is model. Hopefully.
It's
different.
Taking a whole bunch of inputs and then modeling them to produce a map. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I'm gonna. Did you want to say something?
No.
Okay, so that's the maps we are using, and the problem is how to make those maps. So the characteristics are, so it's map of yield and harvested area, because you need to know, for example, to estimate the evapotranspiration, you need to know what the surface planted is, and you need the yield as well to put this all in like unit of product. And so crop specific, global and high resolution, in this case it's 5 arc minutes, so that's about 10 kilometers at the equator. For other years than 2000, so it's been a while that this data is kind of outdated. So there are so many things we would like to study during this period that we can't with that current data set, unless if we use models. So I'm just going to talk now briefly about the method that is applied to go to get that 2000 data set. So it's combining the census data, which is at different units. So this is showing you like the smallest political unit where the census data, which is crop yield and harvested area, by crop is available for at least one crop. So this is the best case scenario. It might be like wheat or something that is really well reported. Maybe for other crops, it will be a bigger political unit that you have the data for. So getting all this data in one place is quite labor intensive. And this is why the latest publication, here I have it right, is from 2008. And so and this is so the limitation as well is well, we want to downscale that to a grid. So they use the land cover product. So they used a combination of GLC and MODIS. And so here you don't know what cropland is there, but you know where cropland is within a country at very high resolution. Actually now it's even 500 meters. But this one was 1 kilometer. And so we can rescale it to the 5 minutes that we want. And that's the other product that they've used. So this is MODIS, similar. So you have the cropland and the cropland mosaic with natural vegetation. So what they do is based on the statistics available at this scale, and this kind of just redistribute to the pixel that they know where cropland is. So I wouldn't really call that a model, but
I would.
yeah, that's my understanding, but I wouldn't call, it's a
But
mix
this
of
is, I guess,
census data and remote sensing, which are both observed data. You do have to make some assumption about where you redistribute, how you redistribute.
Not only would I call that
Yeah.
redistribution a model, the Earth observation data
The processing
are outputs of models that
That's true.
take
yes. Yeah.
some random, I'm not an Earth observation person, but it takes measurements from satellites and produces.
Yeah, it's not the
these
direct
maps.
output.
So it's and almost everything is a model, passing to another model, passing to another model.
Yeah, you have some processing to do before you get to that.
Right.
I guess the point is like if it's modelled, it doesn't really matter if that model doesn't have the factors that you're interested in contained within the modelling process, if that makes sense. So for example, I'm interested in land use, so if something's modelled based on land use, I can't use it, so I can use these data, whereas a figure for what you're doing, you can use it.
The fact that it's a model doesn't mean it's not useful.
Yeah.
But it just
You would say that.
I guess I would say that, right? Yeah. So it's not.
I agree.
It's not. That's not a criticism. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
an observation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. No, but you're right to point out that it's not the satellite tells you, oh, this is cropland. You
No,
have to.
the problem with these satellite problems is the stated uncertainty
Mm.
is pretty high.
Mm.
It's like usually about 85, I don't know, something like that percent,
Mm.
which sounds kind of fairly high. But then if you're doing differences in time, you got 15% sort of plus or minus each way. I mean, I know this is you're not using this through time, but
Mm.
you know, it can.
But it can come later in the.
It makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Which is why the time series with using Earth's observation of land cover is not.
Okay, so.
You're just not meant to do it.
No, you're not meant to
use
do
the change maps rather than the time series.
Okay, that's good to know. so okay, this is how the 2000 map is done. So it's mixing two data sets with different characteristics. So crop specific grouped into crop. The spatial resolution of the census data, as I showed, like changes over the globe, whereas the one from the satellite is uniform by definition. Spatial coverage is pretty much global in both cases, and the main potential interest from the satellite is that it's done yearly now, whereas that as a compilation in a compiled form is only available for quite an old time step now. So this is what we get, and so some people have already done time series analysis based on this 2000 data. So they've had to basically extrapolate from that 2000 what happened in other years. So what they've done is they used FAO stat, which provides a time series, but at annual and more importantly national scale. So they give you only at the national level what's the yield of maize in each year in each country, and same with harvested area. So this is crop specific, but the resolution is coarse. I mean, especially for large countries, but even relatively small like Western European countries. So there are major assumptions with that approach. So the first one is that you assume some homogeneity within the country, so you apply that trend. So for example, you have the yield in 2000 of maize in France, and you have the yield of maize in France in 2010. And so you see the trend from FAO, and you say, well, I take that map I have from 2000, I upscale everything, all my grid cell, I move them by this ratio, like for example 1.2 or something. So that might not be true because you might have higher growth in some region than others, which would make sense because maybe it's a more profitable place to grow or whatever, or the farms, these big farms that are here and smaller farms that are there, so they may not all apply the same technology and so on. And the other assumption is what I phrased as spatial stationarity, which just means that we start from that map of 2000 with certain grid cell where we know there is maize with a certain harvested area, and I'm only going to change I'm only going to increase, for example, the harvested area in those cells where there is already maize. And actually, in 20 years, it's very possible, if you think about what happened in South America in the past 20 years, that there is a new group of cells where they've been deforesting and planting soybean, for example, or something else. And what the current studies do, so anyway, what most studies that do that, I haven't done it for the work I showed before, it's on 2000, which is a bit frustrating. It's either you increase in the grid cell, or if you really need it, like you've really saturated your grid cell, you're going to go to just the neighboring one. But it might not be realistic. So, alternative approach, this is what I want your input on. It's just the very first thought, and I'm sure there'll be some feedback, let's call it to be positive. For other years. So, well, I think you probably guessed it, it's pretty simple, like you still have rely on those national time series, but basically this time instead we could use the land cover products that are available every year. So basically avoiding to have to get all these census grouped again every year, which is not really feasible, and even if you would do it, you would not do it for 175 crops, which is what the 2000 database covers. Oops. So that would relax some of the assumptions I just mentioned. So basically where new cells might have become harvested, so with this example in Brazil that I gave, or if the harvested area grows differently across different cells, you would see that in the satellite base data. So I think that's basically kind of like just a redistribution algorithm that would do that. Of course, limitation is the land cover products are not crop specific, so it's just cropland. So you won't know, like if you see that there's new cell harvested, you will have to make a decision about what crop goes there. Like you have all your additional crop based on FAO, but you still have to make some assumption, and there are some progress being done at the moment in the remote sensing kind of land cover community to try to distinguish different plant types. And some of the most hopeful ones are like rice, because you have the water signal of the flooding the rice field, so you can see that. But for, to distinguish between other cereals, it's not impossible, but currently it's not there. So that's why I said currently available. So I think would be an interesting problem. I didn't put in equations. I didn't put that into equation, but I think that maybe the mathematicians can tell me if they feel like there are some tools, maybe either existing tool or new tools we could use to do this, or if you have other ideas. So I guess I have my second half, but if you have comments now, it would be useful.
Well, I suppose everybody's looking vaguely at me. Yeah. So first, disclaimer.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I use some of these products, but I'm not an Earth observation person,
Yeah.
so it's a bit all second, third hand. The obvious game in town is the George Hurt. I can't remember the name of the underline, but the sort of the person who does this in this space already.
Yeah.
What's the name of? Can't remember.
Are you talking about just processing the satellite?
No.
Or doing the maps?
Doing the time series maps.
That's Deepakre, no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they provide this. So that
Yeah. So he's yeah. Okay, go ahead. Or Brahman Kuti as well.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure what additional you're bringing. So there's people working in this area already.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm aware of, what they told me, is basically they have been using the same methods, which means a lot of manual compiling of those data at different subnational census data.
Yeah.
For a long time series though, but only like the 10 major crops.
Yeah.
But it's not available publicly. And also I don't think they I don't know how they use the satellite. It's the same, it would be the same approach.
Yeah, sure. I guess it's probably to sort of have there's some model uncertainty. This is a model as well, in my thinking. There's some model uncertainty about how this various data from data sets are combined to produce these maps through time. And therefore, because because it's mostly done by one group at the moment.
Mm.
Or one.
Person.
Yeah, well, one person, yeah.
Mhm.
That does suggest that there's an opportunity for other people to do it and in a different way and get a slightly different result, and that could have some value just in and of itself. So that's one argument that would support this work, I suppose.
Mm. Yeah.
I do think we need to have, and this maybe phrases it more as a maths problem, is some explicit quantification of the uncertainty around different data sets that you're using.
Yeah.
Trying to combine as many data sets as you can with some specific level of uncertainty to try and give an estimate that
Yeah.
maybe also has some uncertainty ranges within it, but that respects, gives more weight to the data sets that you believe are more certain than
Yes.
to others. Yeah.
So at the moment, the data from Manfreda, like they basically give you a flag next to in each grid cell you have a flag value that tells you, but doesn't really tell uncertainty explicitly. It tells you which resolution it came from. So like you have a grid cell in like we've seen, I think the cursor resolution was like North Africa. Like you have a grid cell in North Africa at 5 minutes, but it tells you the flag national data. But that was mixed with the satellite, so it's not completely the same as just downscaling everything to the national value everywhere the same way. But
I mean, there are.
but they don't give uncertainty. They just tell you like what resolution it came from, and actually, even if you have, I mean, you would expect that if they do publish the data at province level or county level, there's some certainty, but like they don't tell you about the quality of that.
I mean, there are also a lot of new remote sensing products coming out.
Yeah.
Like, for example, ones that measure MPP,
Mm-hmm.
which could be used as another
For the yield.
For yield, exactly.
Yes. But still, not crop specific, right?
No, you can imagine it's easier to measure MPP than to decide whether it's one and different type of zero or even grass.
Yeah.
I think the MPP products are better than the sort of categorization products. Partly because the category, a bit like probably the discussion we were having in Marcel's lecture, as soon as you start drawing a line saying this is that and this is that, then you have problems, whereas at least with MPP it's a sort of, you don't have to make such distinctions.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a very naive question? What are these maps used for?
Everything.
Yeah, so that's what I showed before. So they are used to do things like that. So, or like this. I mean, the yield is quite obvious. Like if you want to put the volume of water use, for example, per unit of crop, you need to know how much crop was harvested on that land. So that's the yield, is the ton per meter square.
But
And
you
then
were
the
not sure
harvesting.
why you need these high resolution maps rather than those country averages that the FAO were producing.
The land use maps are used by all sorts of things, including the climate models, to drive a whole bunch of things, and they would perhaps be.
Yeah, I mean, so that was that slide, right? Like all these processes are relevant at the grid scale and not at the national scale only. And also in terms of more this specific application, you want to know maybe where, I mean, it's kind of landscape decision making, like where your water use is the most inefficient and where you should target your effort, for example. That's just one example. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question, a little bit different. How does their algorithm determines where a new crop is going to be affected? Yeah, because the way I understand it is if a particular crop is not growing in a region, that means maybe the climatic condition there is not favorable. And where a particular crop is not currently, if it's going to grow in the future, that means maybe those conditions has to change. So how do they determine?
Yeah, I'm not sure actually in that particular paper, so this one, although it's 2008. I'm not sure how they use this suitability, like biophysical suitability, that's what I would call that layer. Like to say like you don't have soybean there, it's just too cold or something. I mean, it starts from this kind of data, so at least in quite a lot of places you would know there's just no soybean there because it's not in the data.
Oh yeah, like because for instance in UK now we don't grow rice, and
Yeah.
you just be wondering whether in the next few years rice is going to grow in UK.
So it has to match the census. Wait, what was it? Did you say are we going to grow rice in the
Yeah,
future?
whether rice is going to be grown in UK.
I don't know. But you can look at how, like you can basically, like it's not, I'm not sure how much it's used there, but there are some maps about biophysical suitability for specific crops depending on the soil and then the climate.
Right.
So and you can just put the climate change scenario and see how that changes and see. Actually, there are some research like about soybean in Europe to see like if we're going to be able to grow soybean and the model shows that you can grow soybean in like Sweden and Germany much better than now. But then there is a water stress question, which goes a bit back to this future drought risk. So, yeah. Okay, if you have some thoughts later on this, let me know.
I have one.
Yes.
I mentioned it yesterday. The stuff on Bayesian melding they've done for air quality,
Yeah,
combining the satellite observations with millions of remote sensors in cities. And
yeah, that made me
towns and
think
everything
of that. Yeah.
to new air
Bayesian
quality
melding,
into
yeah.
the future.
Mhm.
And they use INLO, which Peter gave
Yeah.
on the board to
Yeah, we
actually
can
do
supply
that
those
quickly.
references.
Yeah.
For the air quality, that's Shadik
Gavin
and
Shadik, yeah.
team. Shadik?
Yeah.
Yeah. The
So they
products are
produce-
all online. So
yeah,
when
they-
you look in if you look at air quality stuff, it's coming from all of that combination.
So they produce world maps of air quality.
And the
whereas
sensor,
most of
the
the ground sensors are almost entirely in.
I was going to say the
North
sensor
America,
density is very sparse, let's say, or
Yeah. So
heterogeneous.
it's very similar. And there are papers on the techniques, there's code. So
And would you take that approach as like, you
I
know?
would say it would count for a call like this because obviously applying it to land use is different. I mean, air quality is continuous, and you've got different types of crops, so that you have to overlay
Adapt,
almost a GLM on top, and that's interesting. But there is stuff.
Yeah, I think there's a basic methodology, and we modify because these things always need modifying.
Mm-hmm.
So they use remote sensing and something else.
Yeah,
And the
ground
sensor
measurement.
data. So that's quite similar in the
Yeah.
structure.
Yeah, so it sort of gets around scale.
Mm. And
And they've done,
Done
the big
scale.
thing is how they've scaled it up so that you can actually do it.
so what's the resolution at the end of that map? Oh, I mean,
They have it for cities now,
Oh.
and in time. They produce it at different scales.
mhm.
And I think
Yeah,
it's all
that's great.
done by someone's laptop, so it's not.
Yeah, it's a
not quite
computationally
super
efficient, and I
confusing.
think the code's available.
Okay, great.
You sure the code's
Yeah, I'll look into that. And if I have it's
Yeah, Christian.
this one is not very structured. So I'm just kind of talking a bit generally about some other, how this fits into the wider research project, which is to develop sustainability indicators. So the goal is to have metrics where we can compare environmental sustainability of food across locations. So that's kind of what your question as well. Like within a country, you can see like where there is more or less impact across products. Then you can look at how diet changes will affect the overall sustainability of food production in a country or in the world. And also, that's kind of and across outcomes. So the outcomes being linked to like water quality, water scarcity, different land use related outcomes like biodiversity, and also climate change. So to be able to compare for just one aspect, for example, water consumption across location, you need to input that's context specific, so that we can express it in equivalent terms. So what I mean by that is, for example, the water footprint literature is just saying this is how much cubic meter of water you consume to produce maize here, and this is how much you consume to produce maize there. So for example, you have like Brazil is using way more than China per unit product, and some maybe too straightforward conclusion would be, oh, we should have the maize grown in Brazil. Did I say that right? No, in China, because it's using less. But then actually the availability of the resource, I mean, it's kind of also what Brett mentioned yesterday, like if you put if you want to express, like expressing them in cubic meter doesn't give a comparable estimate, because there's the different context, different local context. So we've done that with basically looking at the local scarcity to put a different weight to express it in more equivalent terms. This is the same concept as when you aggregate greenhouse gases together. Like you have CO2, you have methane, you have N2O, and what you care about is the global warming potential, and then they use this equivalence to express everything in ton of CO2 equivalent. So it's a bit this concept. So it's been done within outcomes like climate change impact, water scarcity, but across outcomes is more challenging. I mean, it's what we've been talking about in different talks this week and before, how you compare, health and biodiversity and greenhouse gas and water. So there's also a lot of, there is a few publications. For example, there was a very developed project, like study in the Chesapeake Bay, so northeast US, where they are looking at water quality. So they came up with those indicators. So they have like different metrics. So it's a whole process, like to decide what metrics you care about, fix the threshold, look at what kind of visualization technique you use to show those results. And in the end, people kind of tend to want one number, right? Or, I mean, it's, yeah. So there are some ways to combine. Do you sum everything? Do you put a weight in sum? Who decides the weights for each thing? Do you do nonlinear combination? So I think it would be interesting to see how the final outcome. If you put the one number, you have to explain it. That's kind of the rule. But as I said yesterday, like at lunch, most people stay at the first level, like the kind of most simpler level, and then they don't really click through. So we have to think a bit carefully if we're going to have one number, how meaningful it is, and how sensitive it might be to all the different ways we achieve it. So for the water sustainability indicator, we basically look at what's the locally available water, the renewable available water, and what's the fraction of this that is consumed to produce a unit of crop. So we expressed it as a depth with the hydrological cycle, which is kind of a surprising concept, but basically is how many years will it take to replenish the annual use. So if you use this, if that depth is less than a year, you're sustainable in the sense that you are using less than what is available. And the definition of available is it's to be defined. What you mean by available? Are you removing what the environmental flow requirement, what we call environmental flow requirement, like what the environment needs every year. Like basically, you might not want to, if there is a river flowing, you might not want to take everything out of the river, even if you could consider that sustainable because it's coming back next year. So you can define this in different ways. But anyway, the final meaning is if it's less than a year, it's sustainable, or if it's more than a year, it's unsustainable. And it reflects, I think I have the map, it reflects like how many years you would have to wait before having the same water stock again. So for groundwater, you see so we've done that in a study led by Marta, 2080. So again, it's for 2000 because it's based on those yield maps. And we've done 9 major crops. So you see like the grid cell, it's at 5 minutes. So you see the grid cell where it's either kind of yellow or red. It's unsustainable by this definition. So it's where we are using, in the case of groundwater, we are using more than the recharge. So the groundwater depletion zones are kind of highlighted, and you see the different crops that have caused that. And then the surface water one, you might be, I don't know how many people here are hydrologists or a bit of hydrology background, but basically at the grid cell, at the water basin scale, you cannot be higher than 1 because you cannot create water. Like it comes each year as the runoff. So, or you could stock it with reservoir, but there's no reservoir in that simulation. So when it's red, it means that basically you're dependent on the upstream scale. So that's why the Nile is completely red, because the crops are grown at the at the mouth of the watershed, like close to the delta, but the rainfall is actually coming from higher up in the watershed. So you also see that happening with, this is a zoom on the RLC region. This is RLC, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, etc. And this is the grid cell color indicates the water depth with surface water. So when it's again higher than 1, it's unsustainable, and the green is sustainable. But in this case, it's again like all this red one. It means that they're using more than the locally generated runoff, so they rely on the upstream input. And you know, this has been this kind of well-known case because the RSC is disappearing because of this overuse of water, and it's to produce those different crops, especially cotton, but also some rice and maize. So next steps. Kind of what are the open questions, at least for me, but I think in the literature at the moment, is how to connect this with trade, because in the end we care about how diets might affect this. How I mean, this food is made for people to eat, right? So we need to link it to where that food is consumed, and this is just an example of proposal made of. I think it's too complicated, but and most of you probably agree, but it's an example of what kind of label you could put on food products in the supermarket, a bit like this nutritional, red lights system, or traffic light system. It's not always red. Well, in the environment, it's quite often red. But you have like here just an example with 4 different metric. Yeah.
I was just wondering about because you've got values for each of them apart from biodiversity, and how are you measuring low, medium, high for biodiversity?
I don't know. That's you have to ask Joseph. But that's a good question. I mean,
it just seems weird that you've got actual values for other things
It's
which
true.
might have boundaries.
Yeah, but even I think that even this value isn't okay for people, for the general public in terms of communication. Like you can't actually something like that. Even just the color. Might
Yeah,
be
it would
enough.
be better just to have
Just put the names here, and I mean we can discuss about many
Sorry.
ways. But no, but I agree with. I mean this is actually one of my points. Is like, what do you like is that, I guess it's CO2 equivalent, but they don't really say what's a gram of pesticide toxicity, you know?
Also, like what? So you've got sizes of the kind of petal things on there and colours. Do they
Yeah,
they represent the same thing?
I think it seems so, right? I think so, but I'm not sure then why. I mean, you could show the same thing twice, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it represents exactly. That was in a Guardian article, and they just put that as a caption. So I have to ask Joseph, who is in Oxford. So one of the things is how you connect with trade, comparing with other metrics outcomes, as I said, like how do you compare those things? And then, there's the question about what you put on products label. Would you ever have a product label with environmental impact? I don't know. But I think that's my last, So, about this, if you have questions, no questions, no? Okay, but about this, so we have this concept, okay? We have the water depth. We can aggregate it at the watershed level, we can aggregate it at the country level, and we say, okay, this is the level of sustainability of maize made in Kyrgyzstan. That's not the easiest country to pronounce. And we know that this country exports to, I don't know, China, some maize. Like what value do we put on that trade link, and what, so with water footprint studies, it's quite straightforward, because like you have basically the embedded amount of water consumed in a unit, and you trade X number of units, so that transfers into your trading some cubic meters of water.
There have been quite a few studies that have done exactly that.
Yeah, a lot of studies, virtual water trade. But with
Or CO2 or land.
yes. No, that's done. But my question is how you do it with something like that, that is not,
Which is not stress or something.
yeah. I mean, so we could calculate the depth per ton, because we have the depth incurred by the current production, so we have the tons produced. So we could divide that per ton and then have like the exports of maize from US to China, is your country pronounced, is incurring a debt in US of 0.2 years. That's one way. That's like the one simple way, but I'm not sure if
It's not sort of
easy to understand.
aggregatable, if that were a word, which it probably isn't, in the same way as carbon or land.
Yeah.
I see your point.
Yeah, because you worked on the land one, so land
Well,
you can add up.
yeah, exactly. Anything you can add up.
CO2 you can add up.
Exactly. Water in cubic kilometers you can add up, but this quantity is not conserved.
No. I mean, another thing I was thinking about is to find some kind of meter cubic. And some people have done that, like they basically look at the volumes of water, so that you can add, and then they look at some index from 0 to 1 of scarcity, and they just multiply, or maybe from 0 to 10 or whatever, but actually I don't know how they would choose that range. Like how much worse it is to have a cubic meter of water in an area that has a scarcity of 0.6 versus a scarcity of 0.8.
Yeah, you've got your aggregation.
Is it 0.2?
You've got your aggregation issue.
Yeah.
As soon as you start aggregating it at the country level, your water debt goes away,
Yeah.
because it's occurring more.
So in
As
this
you find
case, I guess that it.
I think you need to convert that into something that is aggregatable. So, for example, an impact on the ecosystem.
Yeah.
It's an ecosystem valuation.
But you will need the marginal. You will need to know the marginal thing. I Actually, because that's the same here. Like with the water depth, it's basically a ratio of use to availability, but the availability depends on the other uses.
Sure.
So you could actually express it. You would actually need to express it at the marginal difference that it makes, given you already.
But you may well be right about that. But by converting it into something that is conserved, like money, through ecosystem valuation.
If you're lucky to conserve your money.
You know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Then you can then do your allocation. In a way.
Yeah, so that's something we discussed with Brett, is basically putting the price on water, and the price depends on the local, same way as this, depends on the local availability.
It doesn't need to be in monetary terms, it could be in some other term.
Yeah.
But it does need, so it could be in biodiversity units, whatever they might be. But money seems a fairly natural one to choose.
Yeah, so like a bit of ecosystem valuation type of thing. Same service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you, so sometimes in ecosystem services, they value them in terms of the cost of having a technological solution that replaces the natural solution. So could you express it in the cost of shipping water from somewhere where there's actually an excess of water to Uzbekistan?
That would be nice because it would be really expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In order, so how much water would you have to ship in order to get them above one? Below one, sorry. And how much would that cost?
So like importing physical water.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one view. The other kind of side is like more the opportunity cost. Like if you left that water in the river or in the aquifer, what else you could do with it, and what's the value of potentially actually leaving it there, not just thinking, oh, how much value it would create for industry use or residential use, like other human use, but the ecological use, the value of having water flowing, or like an aquifer that's still structurally whatever.
But there's many values, like you said, you have all the things that you could use it for, and you also have the option value of then being able to choose. And so that's, in a way, but in a way, if you imagine the mental experiment where China does pay to ship all the water into Uzbekistan, then they are also giving the Uzbekistani people back those options.
Yeah, I've never had that.
In this section, you started off talking about combining different metrics.
That's yet another.
Yeah, you kind of haven't come back to that.
No. Do you want to tell me how to do it?
No, I want you to tell me how to do it.
I think that's just that point. One way is to go back to this valuation. Like if you put a price, you can combine.
I mean, that is an answer, but it's not a very satisfactory answer.
Why?
Well, I wasn't here yesterday, but for all the reasons I suspect you discussed yesterday with Brett, people have different preferences, they change through time, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
I quite like the idea of a debt, actually, a year's worth of debt that chimes with what sustainability is supposed to be, as in drawing down on capital. So, is there a way of putting the others into a debt as well as the water?
I think for CO2, for example, it's been seen more as like with carbon pricing. So it's the opportunity cost today, but also the opportunity cost of not having it, or the losses for the future generation. Like they will have all these damages, and you decide like this discount rate of how much you value the future, the well-being of future people, which is not exactly this debt concept. I mean, actually, I think that's a bit what has been done by the, I think they are called the Global Footprint Network, like, and maybe other groups have done this as well. You know, when they tell you today we've exhausted, like June 6th, we've exhausted the resources of the planet.
Mm.
So that's
that's another thing that occurred to me, because it'd be like, how many Earths would we need if
Yes.
everyone ate this thing all the time?
yeah. So they in the global footprint network they express it's contentious and lots of people, especially from the science, highly criticize. But anyway, the concept is to have these hectares. Like basically they express everything in land area. That's why they come up with a number of Earths. Even the, like how much water quality you can restore, how much air quality you can restore, CO2 you can store, and so on. To keep it stable, I guess is the reference. But the water is a bit more difficult than CO2 because it's super local. Like it's not having an impact, and that's what also we discussed yesterday. It's like, well, imagine I know that as UK, and it's probably the case, UK is importing those fruits from places that are using groundwater unsustainably, including Spain actually. Why care about it? Like it's Spain's problem, the way they use their resource. Because if Spanish water resources get disappear, except the fact that I might have to source it from somewhere else, it doesn't affect my own water resource. I will have to source food from somewhere else, but the water. So, and then you can say, should you care about the environment in someone else's country? Probably yes, but maybe not. Maybe not as much as your own. Like there's these problems of preferences and.
Well, yeah, you could get around it all by saying it shouldn't be the consumer's choice anyway. It should be the government stopping the unsustainable things happening so that the consumers don't have to make a choice.
Yeah, so in the production region, then that happens because the government except that's why I came to the food label, because that's a way to that's kind of a lever for the consumers to, if they express preference for this product, then the trade structure might change, and they're going to either the producer here will start to match and improve, like apply some water saving things and stuff, or it's just gonna stop being competitive, and you're all going to trade with the sustainable place. But you can't with the WTO, like you cannot say, I don't want to import from you anymore. Like I'm putting a tariff.
On a similar theme, I had a question that was perhaps more mathsy, which was, if you have a set of stochastic model or a set of scenarios with lots of variabilities from Monte Carlo type modeling process, and you're looking at how resilient that model system is or you're looking at outcomes of that model system, some of which are good and some of which are bad. So I just use the word resilience. So it's in a sense, what is resilience, and how does one measure it? So we have spatial outcomes, maps and stuff. We have non-spatial ones like carbon, water use, which obviously is spatial, human things, a whole bunch of outcomes. And the question is, how do you measure resilience from a sort of mathematical point of view? How do you, what does that mean?
Resilience of what?
What exactly?
Okay.
Exactly. So it's coming down to this requirement to have a single number, or at least not thousands of numbers. How to boil down all of these different ensemble members that represent different outcomes under different perturbations in the inputs. To say that, okay, we have a system, we have a system with a policy and without a policy. Is the system more resilient or less resilient between these two worlds? And
Well, isn't resilience a value judgment? It's not a mathematical judgment. We can write down mathematics for your definition of resilience, but it's a value. It depends on who.
Or what you mean by resilience? Like, do you mean resilience to drought?
Well, I guess that's
For me, my main goal is sustainable.
right. So
That's not necessarily.
so that there are at least there are a few different competing definitions of resilience. There's a sort of things don't change, sort of robustness resilience. There's things return to some level
Return
of
back, yes.
that
We're not
return.
called resistance.
Yeah.
Things don't change as resistance and the bouncing back in the
But even that things will definitely change a bit, so it'll be things don't change above a certain level, and that level is the value judgment.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be exactly the same.
No, and there's adaptation. So I've seen it defined as sort of three types of resilience: robustness, not changing, recovery, returning back to sort of a previous state, and another one that begins with R that I can't think of, but it basically is adaptation. It, as in the system goes to a new equilibrium. What's the word to use? Anyway. But it's how to sort of boil down all of this data into some plausible metric.
Fascinating, thank you.
Yeah, so I can show you the work that I mentioned about the Chesapeake Bay project, where they basically, it was quite useful, like they published a kind of guidance report about how to go about these processes, and their whole thing is, how to involve stakeholder, like the big picture thing, the size of thing, your metrics, then the threshold, the combination, the units, normalization, and so on. But I think eventually what was applied in that case was relatively simple. Like, I mean, what you can do is you can try. Oh, sorry, wrong direction. Oh. Well, I show you my team because they are really cute. Team and a few cute collaborators as well. And that's me. And I didn't want to cut that mountain because it's so nice. I had it cut and I'm like, no, I don't want to cut it out. So that's Twitter, that's my website with a very nice, easy to remember address. and my email, thanks UCL, and thanks NERC and welcome as well. Okay, but what I was, so basically what you can do is you can, but I don't know where it is, did I even write something down about this? Maybe at the beginning. Yeah, so you can do those different combinations and see how sensitive your result is to those techniques. That's one thing you can do. Then which one is the best? I mean, I guess you can sort of test it, like test if you have historical data, you can test if your indicator reflects, like if there was, for example, a catastrophic loss of fish species because there's a huge dead zone, eutrophication event that occurred. Yeah, that makes me think about one of the talks there was in the first workshop where you had the path dependency. I mean, we talked a bit with this risk as well. Like if you, like the function is not linear, like there's some hysteresis thing because you go to a polity state and then even if you stop putting nitrogen, you don't go back directly to. So that's another complexity. But thanks, but let me know if you have other questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Is that lunchtime?
I think it is lunchtime.
Oh yeah.
I'm still looking for